Picture this. You're huddled in a frozen trench somewhere in Eastern Europe, 1943. The temperature has plummeted to a level where exposed skin freezes in minutes. The wind, a relentless icy blade, cuts through your thin greatcoat as if it were made of paper. All around you, the world is a monochrome canvas of white snow and grey sky. And honestly, the only warmth is the rapidly fading heat of your own body. For millions of men in this theatre of war, the greatest enemy was not the one across the field, but the cold itself, an adversary that never slept, never tired, and claimed its victims silently in the dark. Survival here was not about grand strategies or heroic charges. It was about the small, desperate battles fought every single hour against the encroaching frost. It was a contest of ingenuity, of turning the mundane debris of war into life-saving tools. What you're about to discover are 7 heating techniques that kept men alive when warmth itself was the difference between seeing another dawn and freezing to death in the night. These are not theoretical concepts from a manual. They are the hard-won secrets of soldiers who faced the ultimate test of endurance and, through sheer resourcefulness, survived. If you appreciate real survival knowledge pulled straight from the harshest proving ground in history, hit that like button right now. Share this with anyone who values practical skills over theory. Drop a comment telling me which technique surprised you most. And subscribe to Warcraft Survival, because this channel exists to preserve the knowledge that once saved lives and might need to save them again. Let us ensure these lessons, paid for at such a high price, are never forgotten. In the shattered villages and farmsteads that dotted the front lines, one structure often remained remarkably intact: the communal bread oven. These were massive constructions of brick and clay, built to retain heat for hours. For the soldiers, they were not just a source of food, but a source of life itself. The technique was one of profound simplicity and efficiency. During the brief periods when a fire was permissible, the oven would be stoked, not just to bake rations, but to heat a collection of stones, dense, river-worn rocks, or even fragments of brick and masonry gathered from the surrounding ruins. Once these stones were heated to a searing temperature, glowing faintly in the dim light, the real ingenuity began. They were too hot to handle directly, of course, and would lose their heat quickly if left exposed to the brutal cold. So each man would carefully wrap his precious stones in layers of scavenged material. A spare scrap of blanket, a tattered sandbag, or even layers of old newspaper, anything that could serve as insulation. This process transformed a simple hot rock into a heat bank, a slow-release thermal battery that could be clutched to the chest or placed at the feet. This portable furnace was a masterpiece of survival engineering. It was completely silent, produced no light and emitted no smoke, making it a perfect tool for the stealth required in a forward position. A soldier could tuck this bundle inside his greatcoat, and for 6, sometimes 8 hours it would radiate a steady, life-sustaining warmth directly to his core. In the profound, freezing darkness of a dugout or a foxhole, this small, heavy parcel of heat was more than just comfort. It was a silent guardian, a physical anchor holding back the fatal grip of hypothermia until the morning light. For the individual soldier, far from the relative luxury of a communal oven, the challenge of creating a personal, smokeless heat source was a matter of constant innovation. Here, one of the most common personal items, the simple tobacco tin, was repurposed into a marvel of microengineering. These small, pocket-sized containers became the chassis for a tiny, yet remarkably effective heater. The concept was to create a controlled, slow burn that would generate warmth without the telltale signs of a larger fire, which would instantly draw enemy attention and artillery. The construction began by modifying the tin. A small hole would be punched in the lid to accommodate a wick, often fashioned from a strip of cotton torn from a uniform lining or a piece of rope. Inside the tin, the fuel was the key. Soldiers used whatever flammable liquid they could acquire, low-grade gasoline siphoned from a vehicle, paraffin, or even rendered animal fat. To control the burn rate and prevent a dangerous flare-up, the liquid was often mixed with sand or earth, creating a sludge that would release its flammable vapours slowly and predictably. When lit, the wick would draw this fuel-infused vapour and sustain a small, consistent flame, barely larger than that of a candle. The metal tin would absorb this energy and radiate a gentle, consistent warmth, just enough to warm frozen hands or to place inside a boot to thaw the leather. It was a quiet, almost smokeless device, a personal furnace born from battlefield debris. This transformation of a simple tobacco tin into a life-saving heater is a powerful testament to the human mind's ability to see potential and function in the most ordinary of objects when survival is the only objective. The detritus of battle was everywhere, and for the resourceful soldier it was a quarry of raw materials. Among the most abundant items were the sturdy metal ammunition boxes used to transport machine gun belts and mortar rounds. Once empty, these containers were often discarded, but to those fighting the cold, they represented an opportunity. Their robust metallic construction made them perfect vessels for creating a larger, semi-permanent heat source for a dugout or bunker, a crude but effective radiator that could warm a small space for several men. The process relied on the principle of thermal mass. The empty ammunition box would be filled with materials capable of absorbing and holding a great deal of heat. Dense rocks were ideal, but in their absence soldiers used anything available: fragments of shrapnel, spent shell casings, broken pieces of metal. The very instruments of war were turned to the purpose of preservation. The box, now heavy with its contents, would be placed near the platoon's main fire during a safe period, often for several hours, allowing the metal and its contents to become thoroughly superheated. Once glowing with absorbed energy, the entire box was carefully carried back to the shelter. Inside the confined space of a bunker, it became a powerful, radiant heater. The large surface area of the metal box would project warmth in all directions, raising the ambient temperature of the small enclosure by a few precious, life-saving degrees. It allowed several men to benefit from a single heating effort, fostering a communal spirit of survival. This method, turning a container for munitions into a source of shared warmth, is a striking example of how soldiers adapted their environment, transforming objects of destruction into tools of life. Creating heat was only half the battle. Keeping it was arguably the more critical challenge. A fire or a heater is of little use if its precious warmth is immediately stolen by the drafts that infiltrate every primitive shelter. Soldiers quickly learned that sealing their living spaces against the relentless wind was paramount. In the absence of modern insulation or weather stripping, they devised an ingenious method of waterproofing and draft-proofing using scavenged cloth and grease, a technique that turned flimsy fabric into a formidable barrier against the cold. Strips of cloth were sourced from anywhere they could be found, torn from damaged tents, salvage from civilian clothing in abandoned homes, or even cut from burlap sandbags. The true innovation, however, lay in how they treated this fabric. It was thoroughly impregnated with any available water-repellent substance. This could be weapon oil, grease from vehicle axles, leftover cooking fat, or even paraffin wax melted down from candles. This greasy, waxy coating made the cloth not only waterproof, but more importantly, airtight. These treated strips of fabric were then painstakingly used to seal every crack and seam in a dugout or bunker. They were stuffed into the gaps between logs, wedged around ill-fitting doors, and laid over ventilation holes that were not in use. This created a nearly airtight seal, trapping the warm air generated by their bodies and their small heaters inside, while locking the biting wind outside. This meticulous attention to sealing the envelope of their shelter demonstrates a deep, intuitive understanding of thermodynamics. They knew that the warmth they fought so hard to create was a resource too valuable to lose. These methods weren't written in manuals. They were born from necessity, refined by men who had no margin for error. The bread oven heat bank, the tobacco tin burner, the ammunition box radiator, each was a chapter in an unwritten textbook of survival, passed from one cold, desperate soldier to another in the frozen landscapes of the front. They represent a form of human intelligence that awakens only when faced with the most extreme pressures, a primal ability to adapt and overcome that is part of our shared heritage. This knowledge is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit in the face of overwhelming adversity. Today we live steps away from heat at the flick of a switch. We are surrounded by a comfort so profound that the kind of cold these men faced is almost unimaginable. But if that switch failed, if the power grid went down in a winter storm, or if a crisis forced us away from the conveniences we take for granted, would you remember what these soldiers knew? Would you be able to see a simple tin, a rock, or a piece of cloth not as debris, but as the key to your survival? This is not just history, it is a practical legacy. Subscribe to Warcraft Survival right now to preserve these skills. Share this video with anyone who values real-world resilience over theory. Because when the world grows cold again, whether in winter or crisis, this knowledge becomes more than just interesting trivia. It becomes a tool. It becomes a responsibility. And through understanding and remembering, you'll be the one who's ready. You'll be the one who holds the warmth.